I knew something was wrong the moment I swiped my badge at the front entrance, and the red light flashed instead of green. The security gate didn't open, for 17 years. That door had recognized me without fail, but now it stood there cold, unyielding. I tried again. The door still stood still. My stomach tightened. "Try the side scanner, Miss Parker," the guard suggested politely, though his eyes flickered with pity. The side scanner beeped once, then locked me out entirely. My phone buzzed at the same moment, a calendar update stamped urgent. Boardroom, 9:30 a.m. No explanation, no agenda, just an order. I took the elevator up with a sense of dread pressing against my ribs. Normally, mornings at headquarters were a blur of cheerful greetings. But today, colleagues passed me in silence, eyes sliding away as though my presence was suddenly radioactive. Something had shifted, and I was the last to know. As I reached the top floor, Daniel, the security officer who'd watched me work late nights for over a decade, stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful, Alice. There's an order from the CEO." He looked at me like a man warning someone not to walk into a fire. My throat went dry. Orders from Jonathan Hale were never casual. If he wanted me upstairs in front of the board, it meant judgment, not discussion. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. When I pushed open the doors, I froze. At the head of the long glass table sat my colleagues, all neatly aligned, all avoiding my gaze. But at my old seat, my seat was a young face I knew too well. Melissa Torres. Fresh out of grad school, ambitious, untested. I had mentored her, guided her through her first project, corrected her mistakes with patience I barely afforded myself. And now she sat there with a company-issued laptop open, filling the role that was still mine as of yesterday. No one explained. No one welcomed me. The message was silent but brutal. I was being replaced. And everyone knew before I did. Wait. Let me know where you're watching from, share in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The story behind it gets even more interesting. I still unsettled from the warning I had received in the hallway, but nothing prepared me for the scene that unfolded before me. The long glass table gleamed under the recessed lights, each seat occupied, every face set with rehearsed neutrality. At the head sat Jonathan Hale, our CEO, the man who could charm television cameras with a smile while crushing his own people with the same ease. He didn't waste a second. "Alice Parker," he began, his voice cutting through the room like a cold blade. "It has come to our attention that you've been engaged in questionable interactions with an outside vendor. This constitutes a potential conflict of interest, one we cannot afford in light of our upcoming transaction." My heart stopped. Conflict of interest, I blinked, trying to process the accusation. I had spent nearly 2 decades safeguarding this company's integrity, cleaning up other people's mistakes, ensuring every audit passed without a scratch. And now, out of nowhere, I was being accused of betrayal. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, hands folded in mock calm. "It doesn't matter whether the allegations can be proven. Perception is reality, Alice. And the perception, unfortunately, is damaging." I looked around the room, searching for one friendly face, one voice that might intervene. That was when my eyes landed on Michael Jennings, sitting 2 chairs down. Michael, my closest ally, the colleague I once protected from ruin when he nearly approved a deal that would have cost us millions. I had stayed late 3 nights in a row to fix his oversight, shielded him from the board's anger, even absorbed part of the blame. Now he sat stiff in his chair, eyes lowered to the folder in front of him, lips pressed thin. He didn't say a word. "Michael," I whispered, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. He didn't look up. The silence was more brutal than Jonathan's accusation. It was betrayal in its purest form, not shouted, but swallowed. Jonathan slid a document across the table. "Your termination agreement. If you sign now, you'll receive a standard severance package. If not, we'll proceed with formal measures. I'm giving you an opportunity to leave quietly." My hands refused to move. The words on the page blurred as shock tightened around me. Was this really happening after 17 years? Was my career reduced to a line item on a legal form across the table? I noticed another figure shifting uncomfortably. It was Daniel Kim, the young corporate attorney assigned to compliance. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the documents, his pen tapping nervously against his notepad. He knew. I could see it in his eyes. The allegations didn't hold water. There was no evidence, no case, and yet his lips remained sealed. "Daniel!" Jonathan's voice snapped across the table. "Everything is in order, isn't it?" The young man hesitated for a moment. I thought he might actually speak up. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward me. And then he nodded. "Yes, sir." The words landed like a gavel. He had chosen silence over truth, fear over integrity. I sat there, stunned, unable to comprehend the speed and brutality of it all. My own friend refusing to defend me. A young lawyer too scared to uphold the law. A CEO rewriting reality to fit his agenda. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as though the walls themselves had turned against me. Jonathan leaned forward, his smile sharp. "Alice, you can make this very simple. Just sign, accept that your time here has come to an end. You're outdated, and the company cannot carry dead weight into the future." The pen lay on top of the paper, waiting. My hand hovered, but didn't touch it. My mind screamed in disbelief, in fury, but my body was frozen. For the first time in years, I felt powerless, but deep inside, beneath the shock, something stirred, a memory, a clause, a signature. The moment Jonathan's words sealed my fate. Two members of HR rose from their chairs like guards escorting a prisoner. One slid the severance packet back into the folder. The other gestured toward the door with a forced smile that wasn't kindness but protocol. "Please, Miss Parker, gather your things." The words cut deeper than the accusation itself. I had given 17 years to this company, nights, weekends, birthdays missed, and now I was nothing more than a liability to be ushered out of sight. My office, once my command post, had already been stripped of dignity. A plain cardboard box waited on my desk. No time to organize. No time to breathe. A stranger from HR began scooping my belongings into it as if I were already invisible. My framed photo of my daughter. My mug with the chipped handle. The fountain pen I'd used to sign our very first vendor contract. They were dropped into the box without care. Without ceremony. I tried to steady my hands, but they trembled as I picked up a stack of files. Around me, colleagues sat frozen at their desks. I could feel their eyes following my every movement, but no one spoke. Their silence was louder than any insult Jonathan could have hurled. The walk down the hallway was a gauntlet. People I had mentored, defended, fought for now, suddenly unable to meet my gaze. They stared at their screens, tapping keyboards with mechanical precision, as though pretending I didn't exist would save them from sharing my fate. My throat ached with the urge to scream, to ask them if 17 years meant nothing, but the humiliation pressed heavier than anger, and I kept walking. As the elevator doors slid open, the HR officer carrying my box forced a smile. "We'll see you to the lobby." The ride down felt endless. Every floor we passed seemed to strip away another layer of who I was. By the time the doors opened, I wasn't a director, a strategist, or even a respected colleague. I was simply the woman with the box. Then came the final blow. In the grand lobby, towering LED screens glowed with company announcements. My eyes caught on the largest display, and my stomach dropped. There, larger than life, was a portrait of Melissa Torres, the young analyst I had mentored only months earlier. Her name scrolled across the bottom. "Welcome to our new Director of Strategic Operations, shaping the future today." My replacement. The image was dazzling Melissa smiling, polished, radiating promise. And beside that image, a slogan, "Innovation begins with bold new leadership." I stopped cold, the box heavy in my arms, my chest burned, not just from the betrayal of Jonathan, but from the deliberate theater of it. This wasn't just dismissal, it was erasure. They weren't sending me away quietly. They were replacing me in neon, broadcasting to the world that I had been outpaced, outgrown, unnecessary. I turned instinctively, searching for a familiar face, some sign of solidarity. That was when I saw Michael, my old friend, the man I once protected from disaster. He was standing by the reception desk, watching me, for a heartbeat. Our eyes almost met. I thought he might nod, might at least acknowledge what was happening. But he didn't. He turned away, his shoulders stiff, pretending to check his phone. His silence was confirmation he had chosen survival over friendship. The humiliation seared deeper than anger could ever reach. It wasn't just being fired. It was the way they stripped me of dignity, the way every person I trusted shrank back, the way my replacement's face beamed down on me while mine disappeared into shadows. I gripped the box tighter and walked toward the doors, the lobby echoing with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps. Every step felt like exile. I carried the box of my life into the house as if it were a coffin. The cardboard was frayed where HR had crammed things in, edges tearing under the weight. I set it down on the dining table and stood there, staring at the chipped coffee mug and the photo of my daughter that had been tossed in without care. After 17 years, this was what I had to show for it, trinkets in a box. The house was too quiet. My daughter, Lily, walked in from the kitchen, eyes wide as she noticed the box. She was 16 now, old enough to read the truth without me explaining. Her voice trembled. "Mom, are you okay?" I forced a nod, though my throat felt tight. "Just a rough day." She reached in, lifting the photo frame with my younger face, smiling beside hers as a toddler. Her lips pressed into a line. 17 years. Right. You gave them everything. Then she looked up at me, sharp, unflinching. "Do you regret it?" Giving them your whole youth, the words struck harder than Jonathan's accusations ever had. My knees almost buckled under the weight. For a moment, pain hollowed out my chest. Regret the late nights, the missed birthdays, the way I always said next time when she asked me to be there for school plays. The sacrifices carved into both of us. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I didn't want to lie to her. And yet, buried under the shame, there was something else, something faint but alive. Her question pulled me backward, down a tunnel of memory, to a different boardroom, 17 years earlier. Back then, the company had been small, fragile, fighting to convince investors we weren't just a dream. The landlord wouldn't lease us space without collateral. The investors wouldn't fund us without assurance. Jonathan had been desperate. That's when they slid the papers in front of me. "Your signature will reassure them." One of the lawyers had said. I was young, hungry, eager to believe in a future. I signed without hesitation, not realizing that, tucked away in the appendix, was a clause that bore my name like a seal. No deal over $1 billion could be finalized without both Jonathan Hale's and Alice Parker's signatures. The memory shimmered now, sharp against the present humiliation. That clause had slept, buried under dust and years, and yet Lily's question had cracked it open again, like a seed stirring under cold ground. The phone rang, jolting me out of thought. I answered, half expecting another cruel formality from HR. Instead, it was my doctor's office, Miss Dick Parker. "This is a reminder. You've postponed your heart checkup twice already. We strongly recommend you keep this appointment. Your health shouldn't wait." I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest pressing harder, not from disease but from recognition. For years, I had ignored my body the same way the company ignored my worth. I traded sleep, meals, even my heartbeat for deadlines and quarterly wins. And here I was, discarded like nothing. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. When I hung up, Lily was still watching me. She placed the photo back in the box gently, her eyes softer now. "Mom, maybe this is your chance to start over, to do something for you." I sank into a chair, the exhaustion washing over me, but beneath it all, something steadier pulsed. Hope. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was there. I thought of the signature, hidden but permanent, sleeping inside those old pages, And for the first time since Jonathan uttered the words, "You're terminated," I felt the faint stirrings of a future they hadn't stolen. What do you think will happen when that hidden clause finally comes to light? Will it save Alice? Or will the company find a way to bury her again? Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't want to miss how it unfolds. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness that felt almost physical, as if the walls themselves carried the echo of Jonathan's words. But grief has a strange way of burning itself out. What remained wasn't despair, it was something colder, sharper. I pulled myself toward the small office I had carved out at home, a place cluttered with boxes of files I had meant to organize for years. Dust gathered thick across the folders, the kind of dust that belongs to lives set aside. My hands shook as I opened the old metal cabinet, the same one I had dragged from apartment to house across decades, never daring to throw away its contents. File after file slipped through my fingers until one caught my eye, a manila folder with handwriting I barely remembered. Appendix C, Side Agreement. My breath caught as I pulled it free. The paper had yellowed. The ink slightly faded. But my signature was there steady, certain, written with the confidence of a younger woman who believed loyalty would be repaid. I sat down. Running my fingers across the lines, I now read with new eyes. There it was, buried in legal phrasing but clear as day. All major transactions exceeding $1,000 require the signatures of both Jonathan Hale and Alice Parker. My pulse quickened. That clause had slept for 17 years. Ignored. Forgotten, but never erased. It was like finding a match in the ashes of a burned-out fire. And then, tucked deeper in the folder, I found something else: meeting minutes from a board session years ago. Jonathan had tried to push a motion to remove the clause, claiming it was obsolete, but the board had rejected it, citing its original legal purpose as a safeguard for investors. His failure was recorded in black and white. I leaned back, stunned for a moment, then let the truth settle. He had tried to bury me long before this. My signature had been a thorn in his side all along, a splinter he could never extract. That explained the contempt in his voice, the way he always tried to sideline me from negotiations. My presence wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous to him. The phone rang, jolting me out of thought. I almost ignored it. But the caller ID froze me in place. It was Richard Lawson, a retired attorney who had once worked for our firm, a man whose memory for contracts was sharper than anyone's. "Richard," my voice cracked as I answered. "Alice," he said, his tone heavy with something between pity and respect. I heard what happened. I closed my eyes. They accused me of conflict of interest. 17 years, gone in an instant. There was a pause. Then a low chuckle without humor. I warned Jonathan years ago. "Your signature in that agreement, it's like a nail in his skull." He called it that once. In fact, said it was a nail lodged in his temple. He hated it because it meant he could never close certain deals without you. That clause is still valid. You know, they never removed it. I checked. My grip on the phone tightened. "You're certain as I am breathing." Richard replied, "If he tries to push through that $1.9 billion transaction without you, it collapses the moment someone challenges it." I hung up slowly, staring at the document spread across my desk. The humiliation of yesterday still stung. The silence of my so-called friends still cut deep. But now, layered over the pain, there was clarity. Jonathan thought he had erased me. What he didn't realize was that I had already left my mark, carved into the very foundation of his empire. My name was inked into a safeguard he couldn't undo. I folded the document carefully, placed it back into its folder, and set it at the center of my desk. For the first time in days, I felt the fog lifting. This wasn't over. I would not be remembered as the woman escorted out with a box in her arms. I would be remembered as the woman whose forgotten signature brought down $1 billion illusion. 2 days later, the world was already moving on without me. I sat in my living room with the television flickering, the voices of anchors blaring as though each word were designed to scrape against my skin. on every channel. Jonathan Hale was being hailed as a visionary. The upcoming $1.9 billion signing was splashed across front pages and business segments. A masterstroke of leadership, the deal that will secure the company's dominance for decades. Jonathan Hale, the man who turned risk into opportunity. I muted the screen, but his face remained confident, polished, rehearsed, the same face that had looked me in the eye and told me I was dead weight. Now he was celebrated as the hero who had streamlined his team to achieve greatness. Anger throbbed in me like a pulse. My phone buzzed with an alert. Stock prices were climbing faster than I had ever seen. Every tick upward felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Each rise was another nail Jonathan could point to and say, "See?" She was holding us back. I shut my eyes, breathing through clenched teeth. They didn't know. None of them knew what sat in the folder on my desk, gathering more meaning with every passing minute. Then, a soft ping, a new email. The sender's name stopped me cold, Thomas Reed. A minor shareholder I had spoken with years ago during an annual meeting. He had always been overlooked. His questions brushed aside by Jonathan with thin smiles. His message was short, "Alice, I don't know if you've seen the chatter. There's talk about an old clause, something that could cause trouble for this deal. People are whispering that Jonathan tried to bury it years ago, but failed. I thought you should know." My fingers tightened on the phone. He was right. They were whispering. But they didn't know the whole truth. I did. And yet, even as that spark of validation flickered inside me, the television blared again. This time, it wasn't just Jonathan speaking. It was analysts praising the company's soaring market value. One commentator said, "This is proof of investor confidence. The clean sweep of leadership only made the company stronger." A clean sweep. That was me they were talking about. I was the dirt swept out of sight so Jonathan could polish his crown. The ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed red. Then green. Then red again as numbers surged. The stock price had climbed nearly 12% in 48 hours. Billions of dollars of paper wealth were being created in real time. I felt my stomach twist. With every rise, the pressure mounted. If I stepped forward now, if I forced the truth into the open, I would be painted as the bitter ex-employee who couldn't accept her fate. They would accuse me of sabotaging not just Jonathan, but thousands of shareholders whose retirement funds and futures rode on those numbers. The weight of that responsibility pressed hard. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about knowing when to pull the trigger and what collateral damage would follow. I stood, pacing the length of the room, fury building with each step. My hand brushed the folder on the desk, the side agreement that carried my name like a fuse, waiting to be lit. Jonathan believed he had buried it. He had told the board it was irrelevant. He had assured investors there were no obstacles. He had sold the world a perfect picture. But I was still here, and I had the one thing he couldn't erase. Through the window, the city lights pulsed with energy, reflecting the fever of markets celebrating their golden boy. I clenched my fists, the anger deep and steady. No longer just humiliation, but fire banked beneath the surface. He thought this was over. He thought he had written me out of the story, but my name was ink. And ink, unlike stock prices or television sound bites, does not vanish. I hadn't spoken to anyone from the company since the day they walked me out with a box in my arms. But late that afternoon, after watching Jonathan's face plastered across every news network, I sent a message, not to Michael, my so-called friend who had chosen silence, but to someone else, someone younger, less entrenched in Jonathan's web of power, Daniel Kim, the junior attorney. When he replied with a single line, "We need to talk, but not here," a pulse of something rare stirred in me. Hope. We met in a quiet coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, a place far enough from the office that no one from corporate would stumble in. Daniel looked 10 years older than when I had last seen him. Though only a week had passed, his suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes darting toward the window every few seconds. "Alice," he said, lowering his voice, "you shouldn't have reached out." If anyone knew, he stopped, swallowed, then leaned forward. But I'm glad you did. I clasped the cup of coffee in my hands. More for the warmth than the taste. You knew, I said. In that room. You knew the accusations had no ground. You knew they were throwing me out because I was inconvenient. His jaw clenched. He didn't deny it. I did know. And I also know something else. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. The clause. Appendix C. It's still binding. Jonathan tried to bury it, but he couldn't. The board shot him down. The words landed like oxygen after drowning. My chest expanded. It was real. I wasn't clinging to some ghost of memory. It was still alive, still powerful. Then why didn't you say something? I asked. My voice sharper than I intended. Daniel's eyes flicked down. Because I was ordered not to. Jonathan made it clear any mention of the clause would be considered insubordination. I've only been here 2 years. I don't have your history, your influence. If I had spoken up, I'd already be gone. And unlike you, I don't have another career to fall back on. The sting softened. He was young, still building his place. I remembered being that age, terrified of missteps. I leaned forward. Daniel, I don't need you to take down Jonathan for me. I just need a chance to get in that room when the deal is signed. Once the clause is in the open, the truth speaks for itself. He hesitated, his hand drumming nervously on the table. If Jonathan finds out I helped you, my career is finished. And if he wins, I countered, then you'll be working for a man who thinks truth is disposable. How long before he decides you're disposable too? For a long moment. He said nothing. Then he exhaled, shoulders slumping. There's a guest list for the signing ceremony. Security will check every name. I can slip yours onto it, but you'll only get one shot. If Jonathan sees you before the reveal, he'll have you escorted out. A flicker of warmth spread through me. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but it was enough. Thank you, I said softly. You don't know how much this means. His eyes held mine, serious and afraid. No. Alice, I do know. Just be careful. If this goes wrong, it's not only your future on the line, it's mine too. I walked out of the coffee shop with the folder clutched tighter than ever. The city lights blurring as dusk settled in, for the first time since Jonathan's betrayal. I felt a current pushing beneath my feet, carrying me forward. Hope. Fragile. Dangerous. But alive. The morning of the signing arrived like the tightening of a noose. I stood in front of the mirror, pulling on the only suit I hadn't boxed away yet. It was 10 years old, the fabric slightly worn at the cuffs, but it still carried the weight of boardroom battles fought and won. I straightened the lapels, tied my hair back, and reminded myself that appearances were weapons. Even faded armor could still protect. By the time I reached the company's headquarters, the lobby was a stage. Cameras flashed, journalists crowded behind ropes, and staff ushered investors through the revolving doors with rehearsed smiles. I kept my head low, slipping past the noise until I reached the top floor where the boardroom waited. And there I stopped. The hallway stretched out like a tunnel, every detail sharpened by adrenaline, the shine of the marble floor, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the muffled sound of voices spilling from the double doors ahead. Laughter echoed from inside, polished and confident. The laughter of men, certain of victory. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the worn folder under my arm. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I could almost see the scene through the door, Jonathan at the head of the table, basking in the glow of cameras, investors ready to ink history. My absence had been carefully staged as proof of progress, and yet here I was, just one step away. The sharp click of heels pulled me from my thoughts. It was Jonathan's secretary, gliding down the hall with a tablet in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw me. For a second, I thought she might scream. Instead, she disappeared into the boardroom. I held my breath. Moments later, Jonathan's voice carried through the doors, smug and clear enough for me to hear. She's here, good. Let her stand out there. She can watch the future move on without her. She's nothing now, no value, no place. The words burned, but they also steadied me. He thought I was powerless. He thought ink could fade. That arrogance would be his undoing. The doors shifted as more investors filed in. Among them was a tall man with silver hair and a heavy accent. I recognized him from years of past negotiations, a European investor who had once insisted on protective clauses for transparency. He paused when he saw me lingering in the hallway. His eyes narrowed, recognition flickering. "Isn't that Parker?" he muttered to a colleague, his voice low but unmistakable. "The original guarantor." The word sliced through the air like a secret almost exposed. My stomach flipped. He remembered. He hadn't forgotten my role in the company's foundation. That memory was my lifeline. A thread reminding me that not everyone had bought into Jonathan's illusion. But it was also dangerous, if he said too much. Jonathan would tighten security, shut the door before I could act. I shifted closer to the wall, clutching the folder tighter, willing myself invisible until the moment was right. Sweat trickled down my spine beneath the suit jacket. Every second felt like a gamble. Inside, I heard Jonathan laugh again, the sound of glasses clinking, the confident rhythm of a man who thought the script had already been written. "Gentlemen," he said, "today we secure not just a deal, but a legacy." My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The hallway seemed endless, the door both a barrier and a promise. My fingers brushed over the folder, the paper inside humming with the weight of 17 years. This was it, the edge of the cliff. One step forward, and everything would change. I steadied myself, listening to the cadence of voices, waiting for the right moment to move. My legs trembled, but my resolve held. Jonathan believed I was finished. The investors believed they were minutes from triumph. But in that hallway, in that fragile, breathless pause, I knew something none of them had grasped yet. The story wasn't over. It was about to begin again. The boardroom was a theater, every detail polished for spectacle. Cameras had been banned from the final negotiation, but the weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, immaculate in a navy suit, his cufflinks glinting as if they themselves were part of the celebration. He spread his hands toward the investors. "Gentlemen, let's begin," he said smoothly. The legal teams tapped at their laptops, documents projected onto the large glass wall, pages scrolled, clauses highlighted, digital seals flashing. For a few minutes, everything moved like clockwork. Then the screen froze. A red bar pulsed across the top, drawing every eye. Pending signature, Alice Parker. The silence was instant. Total. The words hung there in sharp contrast against the white screen. Like blood on snow, my name erased from the company, mocked in the hallways now blazed across the wall. Undeniable. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he recovered with a practiced chuckle. "A clerical error," he said, waving a hand as if brushing away dust. "The system is referencing an outdated file, nothing to worry about." But murmurs rippled among the investors. Several leaned forward, whispering urgently to their lawyers. The screen didn't move. The words didn't fade. "Mr. Hale," one of the European investors said, his accent cutting through the room, "this looks less like an error and more like a legal requirement. Why does the system demand 2 signatures?" Jonathan's smile thinned. He tapped his tablet, and within seconds, a new file appeared on the wall. "This is the most current version of the agreement," he announced confidently. The document scrolled again this time, without my name anywhere on it. Only his. "There. You see, the matter is resolved." But the tension didn't lift. One of the American investors, a veteran with a gravelly voice, slammed his palm on the table. "If that's true, then explain why our bank's compliance office still requires a dual signature to release funds. I spoke with them this morning. They said without Alice Parker's name, the money doesn't move." The room fractured into chaos. Lawyers whispered frantically. Investors pressed Jonathan for answers. And the system screen stubbornly repeated the same line, pending signature, Alice Parker. I felt my pulse race in the hallway, each word filtering through the crack of the door. My entire body tensed. This was it, the clause I had signed 17 years ago, rearing up from the past to block Jonathan's empire. Inside, Jonathan's mask was slipping, his cheeks flushed, his voice rising just slightly. This is exactly what I've been warning about: old provisions cluttering the system. It's meaningless. We are the decision makers here, not a relic of outdated paperwork, but the investors were no longer nodding along. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes cold. Another checked his phone, likely calling his bank directly. And then came the sharpest cut yet. "If this contract is valid," the European investor pressed, his gaze drilling into Jonathan, "why does the financial institution still recognize Parker's authority? Either you are lying to us, or your governance is incompetent. Which is it?" Jonathan's hands clenched around his pen. He was losing them, and he knew it, from where I stood, breath held against the wall. I could feel the shift in the air. Power was tilting. Every second the words, "pending signature," Alice Parker, remained on that screen. The foundation under Jonathan's feet cracked wider. The boardroom buzzed like a hive disturbed. Investors demanding proof. Lawyers scrambling to find explanations that didn't exist. The tension pressed against my chest until it hurt to breathe. For years, I had been invisible. Now, my name alone was enough to stop a billion-dollar deal in its tracks. The storm had begun, and Jonathan couldn't control the wind. The words, "pending signature." Alice Parker still glowed red on the glass wall when I pushed the boardroom doors open. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, chairs scraped back, and all eyes snapped toward me. For a moment, the silence was thick enough to choke on. I didn't rush. My heels struck the polished floor with steady rhythm as I walked to the table. In my hands was the weathered manila folder, the one Jonathan had spent years pretending no longer existed. I set it down in front of him with deliberate calm and slid the original side agreement across the table. The room held its breath. "This," I said, my voice low but firm, "is the document you all seem to have forgotten. Appendix C, signed by both Jonathan Hale and myself. Still valid, still binding." Jonathan sprang to his feet, face flushed crimson, his composure cracked. The charm that fooled cameras and investors nowhere to be found. He jabbed a finger at the folder. "This is irrelevant, outdated. It has no power here." I met his fury with stillness. 17 years doesn't erase ink. "Jonathan!" He snatched the document, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "It's expired," he barked. "Contracts like these have statutes. They fade, like everything else. You are nothing but a relic." Before he could slam it shut, one of the investor's lawyers, a gray-haired man with a reputation for precision, stood. He adjusted his glasses, studied the document, and then turned toward the room. "No," he said quietly. Voice carrying the authority Jonathan's lacked. This clause was never revoked. It was never superseded. Legally, it stands as firmly today as it did the day it was signed. Any transaction exceeding $1 billion requires both signatures. Gasps rippled across the table. The words dropped like a gavel, splitting the atmosphere. Jonathan's face twisted. "That's impossible. We voted to eliminate it." But the lawyer's expression was implacable. "You attempted. The minutes show the board rejected your motion, which means this agreement remains in effect." The investors erupted in a storm of questions, some demanding to know how such a fundamental safeguard could have been overlooked. Others demanding Jonathan explain himself. His voice rose, shouting over them, trying to restore control. The board fractured before my eyes. Half the members leaned toward Jonathan, desperate to protect their positions, parroting his claims of irrelevance and progress. The other half, faces pale and tense, whispered among themselves, recognizing the weight of the law, unwilling to risk their reputations on his arrogance. It was chaos, but I was calm, for once. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply placed my hands on the table and waited until their noise ebbed into uneasy silence. My stillness cut deeper than Jonathan's shouting ever could. "You can argue perception," I said evenly. my eyes sweeping across the faces around me. You can argue loyalty, but you cannot argue law. That clause is alive. And the moment Jonathan fired me, he triggered it himself. A director across the table leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. She's right. The words cracked the dam. Several members of the board nodded reluctantly, their resistance folding beneath the weight of truth. The split had turned into a fault line, and Jonathan stood alone on the crumbling side. He pounded the table, veins straining at his temples. You fools! She has no authority here. She's been terminated. The lawyer from the investors didn't flinch. Termination has no bearing on the validity of a co-signatory clause. Her name is inked here, and ink does not vanish. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. I let it linger. Standing tall, the folder resting beneath my fingertips, like a blade sheathed but ready. I didn't need to gloat. My authority wasn't loud, it was undeniable. Etched in black ink, 17 years old, but stronger than Jonathan's entire empire. And as I looked around the fractured boardroom, I knew the balance of power had already shifted. For a moment, the room teetered on the edge of collapse. My folder sat open on the table, the clause clear and undeniable. Jonathan's face glistened with sweat. But then something changed. His shoulders straightened, his mouth twisted into a smile that didn't belong to a man defeated. He leaned forward, his voice regaining a dangerous calm. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we've all been misled. What Ms. Parker is waving around here may look official, but it's outdated nothing more than an antique. The company addressed this years ago. He snapped his fingers, and his secretary hurried forward with a fresh stack of papers. Jonathan plucked the top document and thrust it into the center of the table. Here, he declared triumphantly. An internal resolution passed in 2010. This clause, Appendix C, was rescinded. Permanently, it holds no weight. The board members leaned in, eyes scanning the page. Relief flickered across a few faces. Some even nodded, clinging to the possibility that Jonathan still had control. For a few seconds, I felt the balance shift away from me. My pulse spiked, and the air in the room grew unbearably heavy. Michael, the friend who had betrayed me with silence, whispered to another director, "See, it's handled. She's done." A hollow ache spread in my chest. After everything, the humiliation, the exile, the courage it took to walk back into this room, was it possible Jonathan had won after all? But then I caught it. One line at the bottom of the page, a signature missing. My breath steadied. The fire returned. I reached into my folder and pulled out the second document I had brought. My hand didn't tremble as I laid it on the table. That resolution you're holding, I said quietly, was never valid, because it was never recognized by the court. Jonathan's smirk faltered. Lies. He spat. I slid my page across the polished wood. The red stamp gleamed under the fluorescent lights, filed and authenticated by the state commercial court. 2008. Every board member could see it. This, I continued, my voice cutting through the static of their murmurs, is the last legally binding confirmation of Appendix C. It proves your so-called resolution was nothing but theater. You knew it. You tried to bury it. And now it's here, in front of everyone. The lawyer from the investors leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he examined the seal. She's correct, he said. Without a court-verified revocation, the clause stands. Hale, your internal paperwork is meaningless. A stunned silence dropped like a hammer. Jonathan's face drained of color. His hands shook as he tried to flip through the papers again, searching for an angle, an escape. This can't be. There must be some mistake. But the mistake was his, and it was unfolding in real time. Suddenly, one of the investor's phones buzzed sharply. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then looked up with a voice as cold as steel. The markets are reacting. All heads turned toward the giant ticker running quietly along the far wall. The company's stock, which had been climbing relentlessly for days, had begun to plummet. 1%, 2, 5. The numbers bled red, tumbling faster with every refresh. "This isn't possible," Jonathan muttered, but his voice broke. "It's very possible." Another investor snapped. "News spreads fast. Word of this dispute is leaking already. Confidence is collapsing." My heart pounded in my chest. But I didn't flinch. The humiliation of being marched out with a box. The sting of watching Melissa's face light up the lobby screen. The silence of Michael, all of it, coiled together now, tightening around Jonathan like a vice. He tried one last push, slamming his fist on the table. "You think anyone will believe her? She's nothing, she's enough." The investor's lawyer interrupted sharply. "The law doesn't care what you think she is. Her signature is binding. Your empire depends on it, and you have destroyed your own credibility trying to deny it." The room seethed with unease. Board members whispered furiously, some already sliding their chairs away from Jonathan, as if physical distance could shield them from the fallout. The stock ticker dropped again, 10% now. Billions of dollars in market value erased in minutes. The boardroom was no longer a chamber of confidence, but a battlefield stripped bare. The giant screen still flashed pending signature, Alice Parker. And beneath it, the market ticker bled red. Billions evaporating with every passing minute. The once celebratory atmosphere had dissolved into panic. Jonathan Hale sat slumped in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as though they alone could hold his empire together. The flush had drained from his face. His tailored suit looked less like armor now, and more like a costume. He had built his career on perception, on convincing the world he was untouchable. But perception had cracked, and the truth had poured through like floodwater. Investors pushed back their chairs, voices sharp and unyielding. "The deal is void. We can't proceed under false pretenses. Our clients will not tolerate this level of risk." The words fell like hammers, each one striking harder than the last, one by one. The signatures meant to seal a $1.9 billion triumph were withdrawn. The empire Jonathan promised had vanished before it ever began. I watched him shrink into his seat, shoulders hunched, lips moving in desperate whispers no one cared to hear. He looked not like a visionary, but like a man staring into a grave he had dug with his own arrogance. And then, in the middle of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A man I recognized, a senior partner representing one of the largest international funds, walked directly toward me. His presence was steady, unhurried, as though the storm around us didn't touch him. He stopped in front of me, his gaze steady. "We don't need him," he said, his voice carrying across the fractured room. "We need you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The same room that had humiliated me, that had tossed me aside like a relic, now shifted its focus, not on Jonathan, not on his board, but on me. The words didn't just validate my fight. They restored something I thought I'd lost forever, my dignity. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down at the screen. A message from Lily. "Mom, today you got it all back." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of Jonathan. I slipped the authenticated contract back into my folder and closed it with deliberate calm. This was never about revenge. I said quietly to the room, it was about truth, about honoring what was written, what was promised. And today, truth stood firm, no one argued. They didn't need to. The evidence was there, and the consequences were undeniable. I turned and walked toward the doors. Each step felt lighter, as if the years of humiliation and sacrifice were finally lifting from my shoulders. Behind me, I could still hear the fractured board arguing, investors packing their briefcases, Jonathan sinking deeper into his chair. But none of that mattered anymore. When I stepped outside, the crisp autumn air rushed against my face. The leaves along the plaza danced in the wind, orange and gold swirling like sparks in the fading afternoon light. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to meet a deadline or chasing someone else's dream. I was simply breathing. The folder was still under my arm, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like freedom. My signature buried, ignored, dismissed for 17 years, had become the final judgment, the stroke of ink that toppled arrogance and restored balance. I looked up at the sky, exhaling slowly. Liberation didn't roar. It didn't demand attention. It simply arrived, quiet and unshakable. And in that quiet, I finally found my pride again. 17 years of loyalty had been silenced with a box. But in the end, it was a single signature that rewrote the story. Now let me ask you, what did this ending mean to you? Did Alice reclaim more than just her career? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe so you never miss the next story.